Do you think you already know the Strait of Hormuz? You believe it is nothing more than a tense geopolitical coordinate, a suffocating choke point on the global energy map because that is the only version the media has ever shown you. But have you ever imagined how a small, barren island where temperatures can melt, human will, and fresh water is more precious than gold became the center of imperial ambition for centuries? Why were some of history's most renowned explorers, from Marco Polo to Alfonso de Albuquerque, willing to risk their lives just to set foot on this strip of scorched land? Forget the headlines of the daily news. Hormuz is not a dry military outpost. It is a place where mountains of salt rise from the earth in colors like a rainbow, where deep red clay canyons resembling the surface of Mars collapse straight into the dark blue of the Persian Gulf. It is a civilization that survives not because of natural abundance, but because of its ability to transform harshness into a form of art. An island where the land itself tells stories, where salt is not just a mineral, but the backbone of identity and pride. Here, power is not measured by weapons, but by the ability to endure under burning heat and the isolation of the sea. This is not the 10th Strait you have heard about. This is a surreal world where nature and history collide to create something unlike anywhere else on Earth. This is Unreal Hormuz, the coral reefs. The Persian Gulf is, by most conventional ecological measures, an environment in which coral reef systems should not be able to function. Summer water temperatures regularly reach 96 degrees F, a level at which corals in virtually every other part of the world experience mass bleaching and death, unable to sustain the symbiotic algae that give them both color and the majority of their nutritional needs. The reefs around Hormuz Island and the Strait's peripheral islands not only survive these temperatures, they have, over thousands of years of exposure to the Gulf's extreme thermal cycling, developed a degree of heat tolerance that represents one of the most significant cases of adaptive evolution. In modern marine biology, these corals carry encoded in their biology information about how reef systems can persist where persistence should be impossible. For the dive communities, marine biologists, and fishermen who work in relationship with the Strait's reefs, their existence is both a resource and a reference point. The reefs support more than 700 fish species, sustaining the protein supply of coastal communities across the northern Gulf Coast. Their presence defines where fish aggregate, where nets are set, and where traditional fishing grounds have been maintained across generations. The Gulf's coral reefs became heat-tolerant through thousands of years of thermal exposure that killed less resilient individuals and left as survivors those whose physiology could accommodate extremity. This is evolution operating in visible, comprehensible time. The current threat is more rapid than adaptation can match. Oil contamination from tanker traffic, runoff from coastal development, and military activity in the reef zones all impose pressures for which no biological adjustment exists. Places like the Hormuz Reefs remind us that survival is not a metaphor. It is a mechanism, and mechanisms can be broken. Hara Mangrove Forest. Along the southern and southeastern shoreline of Qeshm Island, the Hara Forest covers approximately 30 square miles of tidal channels and mudflats in a dense growth of Avicennia marina, a species of mangrove that has evolved a physiological solution to one of nature's more fundamental contradictions: how to grow in water that would kill almost any other plant. The Har trees filter salt through their root systems, expelling it through their leaves in visible crystals, sustaining themselves in an environment of near total salinity through a biological mechanism refined across millions of years. From the air, the forest reads as a dark green labyrinth pressed against the Gulf's blue edge. From within, at water level in a narrow boat, it is something closer to enclosure, the light filtered through dense canopy. The silence punctuated by the movement of birds that use the forest as a stopover on migration spanning continents. For the fishermen who work the hair channels, the forest is a production system, not a wilderness. It generates the nutrient conditions that support the shrimp and fish populations of the surrounding Gulf, functioning as a nursery for species that eventually move into deeper water and into nets. The communities that have fished these channels for generations developed harvesting patterns calibrated to the forest's seasonal rhythms, taking from it without exceeding what it could regenerate. The Har forest became this dense through centuries of undisturbed tidal cycling, in a gulf that was, until recently, relatively free of industrial pressure. Today it faces oil contamination from tanker traffic, warming water, temperatures that stress the trees, and the increasing frequency of extreme heat. events. What happens when the nursery of a sea is compromised is not an environmental abstraction. It is the direct elimination of a food system that coastal communities depend upon for daily survival. Places like Har remind us that the most essential infrastructure is often the least visible. Hormuz Island and the Strait, rising from the Persian Gulf approximately 5 meters off the coast of Bandar Abbas. Hormuz Island spreads across roughly 18 square miles of some of the most geologically theatrical terrain on the planet. And yet it is inseparable in both geography and consequence from the narrow corridor of water that surrounds it. A passage barely 21 mi across at its tightest point through which the energy, architecture of modern civilization flows each day without pause or guarantee. The island's mountains do not merely stand. They perform, layered in bands of iron oxide red, sulfuric yellow, salt white, and violet, stacked in formations that reflect 570 million years of compression, uplift, and mineral transformation beneath a sun that allows no shadow to soften what the rock is trying to say. While below them, supercarriers the length of 4 city blocks move through, shipping lanes barely 2 miles wide in each direction, carrying approximately 21 million barrels of crude oil daily, representing 20% of the world's entire supply. Their wakes disturbing the same iron-rich coastline where the island bleeds its red mineral runoff slowly and without urgency into the Gulf. For the people who live within this dual reality, neither the geology nor the geopolitics registers as extraordinary. The same iron-rich clay that colors the coastline, known locally as galak, is incorporated into the local diet, mixed into a sauce called surak, pressed into flatbread, traded as a seasoning across the southern coast. While the marine pilots and small boat fishermen who share the strait's congested lanes treat the passage not as a symbol of global tension, but as a working environment defined by current, draft, and the particular alertness required when survival depends on reading the water correctly. This is a place where the most intimate human relationship with landscape, pressing the Earth's minerals into food, navigating its waters by inherited knowledge, coexists with the most abstract global dependency, where a community's daily sustenance and the financial stability of entire economies occupy the same narrow geography without ever quite acknowledging each other. Hormuz became this layered contradiction through processes operating at entirely different scales. The salt dome tectonics and desert erosion that produced the island's impossible colors over hundreds of millions of years, and the coincidence of geology and empire that formalized the strait as a choke point when industrial civilization built its energy infrastructure around Gulf reserves. Today, both pressures intensify simultaneously. The island's fragile soil and limited fresh water straining under the weight of the attention its visual power has attracted, while the strait carries not just oil but the compounded anxiety of every economy that depends on it remaining open. Places like this remind us that the world's most vivid beauty and the world's most fragile stability have always had more in common than either headline or postcard suggests. Qeshm Island, stretching approximately 87 km along the northern edge of the strait, Qeshm is the largest island in the Persian Gulf. Salt-scarred, wind-polished, and carrying its scale without grandeur. Temperatures regularly exceed 115 F in summer, and the humidity rising from the Gulf makes the air feel less like something breathed than something worn against the skin without consent. For the people who live here, this extremity is the organizing principle of everything. The day does not follow the clock. It follows the heat. Before sunrise, when the air briefly releases its grip, the island stirs into concentrated activity. Fishermen push boats out before the water begins to shimmer. Markets empty before shade disappears. And by early afternoon, Qeshm does not slow. It stops not from laziness, but from generational understanding that certain hours belong entirely to the sun. Life resumes in the evening with the intensity of a community that has learned to compress its existence into the margins the climate allows. Houses are oriented to capture the northwest wind. Walls are thick for thermal mass, not grandeur. Water is managed with a discipline that outlasts the scarcity that originally created it. Qeshm became this way through tectonic forces that offered its inhabitants almost nothing easily and demanded in return a quality of attention that left no room for abstraction.